So we're moving to the issue of Social Security and its future, and we are joined by former Commissioner of the U.S. Social Security Administration, Ann Barnhardt, the third longest-serving commissioner in agency history. She has also served as a member of the Social Security Advisory Board and was actually once a Social Security employee. Ann Barnhardt is a University of Delaware graduate and also worked, as many know, as a legislative assistant to U.S. Senator Bill Roth and with his campaigns. Also on our panel is United States Senator for Delaware, Chris Coons, a Democrat who's wrapping up just very close here to the anniversary of his swearing in, his first year in the United States Senate. He serves on the Senate Budget Committee, placing him at the epicenter of the current debate on Capitol Hill about how to cut spending. Welcome to both of you. Again, a reminder to everyone, get us your questions. We will be going to questions and answers after an initial discussion about the future. Ann Barnhardt, the obvious question to ask first is, has Social Security reached what is a tipping point in terms of its long-term viability?
Let me say a couple things in response to that, Nancy. First of all, looking at the situation with Social Security and the future of Social Security, it's an issue that's playing out in a landscape that's complicated by the politics, by the economics, certainly the economic downturn we've been experiencing, but most definitely by the unrelenting, unyielding, and absolutely true demographics. The fact of the matter is, when the program started, there were a number of workers for every single person who was receiving benefits. That has been decreasing, that ratio, over the years. We're now at a situation where we have 3 workers for every person who's receiving benefits. And in the not too distant future, that's going to go down to 2 or under 2 workers. So when you talk about things like a tipping point, from a demographic standpoint, there's no question that as currently constructed, changes have to be made in order to ensure that full benefits are there for the future. Absolutely. And I want to say, as the person who ran Social Security for over 5 years, I think it's America's most important social program. And I would say to Dr. Seidman that I absolutely agree with him, that as we look at the situation today, we need to focus on it in a bipartisan way. We need to accept the fact that it is our most important social program, look at the benefits that it has brought and continues to bring to Americans, and to take the steps that are necessary to ensure that it continues to be there 100% in the future.
Senator Coons, let me put that to you, but with a twist. Which tipping point is greater, the demographic tipping point or the political tipping point?
Well, Nancy, first let me just thank AARP and CSC and the University of Delaware for hosting this important forum. As Dr. Seidman said previously, one of the most important things we can do today is to reassure folks that Social Security, even if we do nothing, even if there is an utter lack of political will to make any of the responsible changes that might be needed in the future to ensure full benefits for the next generation or 2, the Social Security program as currently constructed will continue to pay out benefits for the rest of our lives, our children's lives, and probably our grandchildren's lives. It is not on the verge of going bankrupt. There is no critical tipping point. To Joanne's point, if what we are gearing to achieve is sustaining the full current level of benefits for the next several generations, we will at some point, 10, 20 years from now, have to implement changes. And there's 6 different elements. I mean, the Social Security program is not that complex. There's only so many levers. Unlike Medicare or Medicaid or the broader economy, there's only so many levers. The demographic wave that's going through our society and the economic changes of the current downturn are both big drivers, but our biggest stumbling block is political leadership. We need to make some responsible compromises, but we are in no pressing crush to get it done today or tomorrow. We've got until at least 2036 before there would be any reduction in benefits at all. And so I just wanted to start by putting that floor under this, and then to agree with Joanne that this is our most important compact between the American people, that for more than 75 years, it's provided the guarantee, the foundation for retirement with dignity, for support, for quality of life, for those who are disabled, those who are survivors. And so saving it, I believe, is essential, is bipartisan, and is in the best interests of this country and its future.
So what can we do to fix it for the long term? Is it, some of the options that are on the table are reducing benefits, raising the Social Security taxes or privatizing it? A combination, what needs to happen?
Well, let me say, first of all, fixing Social Security is simple, but it's not easy. I say simple because it's simply a matter of mathematics. You look at what you want your benefit to be. You look at how many people are going to be retired at various key points in time. You have your actuaries run the numbers, and you can figure out exactly what numbers you need to come up with in order to get to the benefit to be provided to that number of people. Simple, mathematically speaking. My husband teaches math. He'd tell you it's simple, but it's not easy for exactly the reasons that were discussed in the previous panel and the senator just alluded to in terms of the nation mustering the political will to be able to deal with it. I do want to say this, that the ease of doing it, and I put that in quotation marks because, again, I said it wasn't easy, becomes increasingly difficult with each passing year. We were first alerted to the problems with the Social Security solvency situation in 1995 when Donna Shalala was the Secretary of Health and Human Services under then President Bill Clinton. So we've been talking about the fact that Social Security needed to do some financial restructuring in order to be there solidly on into the future for almost, 17 years now? And each year that we have delayed action has actually compounded the problem, because it means that by not taking action, we have actually lost the opportunity to be building revenues, and at the same time, increasing numbers of beneficiaries have been coming in and getting so-called locked in with the benefits. Let me just give you a brief example. When my son was born and my husband and I talked about sending him to college, he started school, we started a college fund when he was in kindergarten. So by the time he graduated from high school, he pretty much could go to any college he wanted to. If we had waited until he was a senior in high school to start saving for college, that college fund wouldn't have been nearly so large. So the point is, each year that we've waited, it's kind of like, 1995 was kindergarten, and now we're pretty much at junior high with Social Security. And so the senator's absolutely correct that, it's not that Social Security is going to go bankrupt at any time in the future, but and in saying that, the benefits will still be there and we'll have a reduction in benefits after 2035. I think the point I would like to add to that is that the sooner we take action, the less drastic that action is going to have to be, whether it's benefit reductions, tax increases, or whatever solution.
But that gets us back to the political tipping point, and Senator Coons, most people would agree that it's kryptonite to a politician to talk about changes to Social Security. That might be how we got from 1995 to 2011. The Congressional Supercommittee is staring down the deadline at this point to come up with $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. It's even hard to say that total. How can that be accomplished without the political risk of touching Social Security or the other entitlements, when that risk is so great that it has dragged this process for more than 10 years?
They don't need to tackle the Social Security problem in order to achieve the Supercommittee's target of 1.2 to 1.5 trillion in federal spending savings over the next decade. In my view, and the view of many others in Congress, Republican and Democrat, they should tackle the broader challenges of entitlements meeting Medicare and Medicaid and revenue. And there have been proposals by a number of commissions that would put on the table a broad range of options for reducing tax rates, broadening the base by closing loopholes in ways that could generate increased revenue, and for some responsible restructuring or changes to Medicare or Medicaid. That's distinct from Social Security. Many folks say, and I would agree with Joanne, that the sooner we tackle the long-term changes to Social Security, the more compounding benefit future beneficiaries will get from it. But if there's one thing I wanted to do today, it was to do no harm. It was to reassure folks who are current beneficiaries and concerned about future beneficiaries, whether they're children or grandchildren, that the program is solid. The program is not in some crisis. Responsible stewardship would mean tackling the long-term structural challenges earlier.
Let me just take this moment to let those of us who are joining us on radio that you're listening to WSDL in Ocean City. Go ahead, Joann Barnhardt, you had something you would like to add.
Yes, I wanted to say that one of the points that the senator made was incredibly important just a moment ago, and that's this notion that Social Security does not have to be dealt with during this deficit reduction initiative. It's very important that people understand there is no relationship between funding Social Security and the size of the debt and the deficit in this nation, because Social Security is funded by a trust fund, a dedicated tax that pays for it, not general revenues. Where the budget situation comes into play for Social Security is, as Joanne was describing in the earlier panel, when the Social Security system redeems those bonds, the federal trust, the federal government, general revenues are going to have to come up with that money, and that's where the deficit issue plays into Social Security. Making cuts in Social Security is not going to decrease the deficit or the debt one iota. There is absolutely no relationship. But making the federal government make good on payment for those bonds is absolutely a deficit and a debt is a situation.
Senator Coons, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, you said previously there's three options: privatize, cut benefits, or raise taxes. Of the range of things that we can and should be doing with Social Security, a fourth one also includes tightening the ship, making sure that we've done everything we can to eliminate fraud from the system. There's been estimates that there's as much as $50 billion a year. Now, that's because it's an enormous program. It's a very large program with more than 50 million current beneficiaries. There are things that could be done to make sure that that the benefits are being paid really only to appropriate and legitimate beneficiaries that would save some of the costs and make it go a little bit farther. I just wanted to be clear up front that I'm someone who thinks privatizing it is an unwise idea. I think it was advocated, it was debated vigorously previously. I think the vagaries of the stock market are now painfully clear to many who were saving for their own retirement. And so I think that's a proposal that's not likely to reemerge in the short term. But those are two things I wanted to make sure I spoke to before we get on to your next question.
Well, you mentioned you wanted to come here and do no harm. And as someone who's barely a year out of a difficult election season, I think you can forecast where we're headed with the upcoming presidential election. And there has been some characterizations of the program in the debate that's going on right now among the Republicans, and including presidential hopeful Rick Perry. The Texas governor called Social Security a Ponzi scheme and a monstrous lie. That's only going to fuel the public's panic, the public's concern, will it not? How can we balance political debate and what you're telling us in a forum such as this is what you see as the reality?
Well, I'm certainly not here as Rick Perry's campaign manager, but I do want to say this. I do think maybe the point he was trying to get at too, and I mean, obviously I haven't talked to him and I don't know, but I do think there is an issue there about this pay-as-you-go system. And in the film that we saw that preceded the live panelists today, there were people who talked about the money that I've been putting away for Social Security for years. And I think that, it's important for people to understand the reality is Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. There is no money that you put away for the future. There is no money that my son, who just started his first job 2 months ago, is putting away for the future for himself. He's actually paying the benefits for my mother right now. I paid the benefits for my mother. And so it is a generational compact, as discussed in the very first panel. But it's pay as you go, meaning that there is not a fund, even though you have an account number, there is not a fund that has the money that you've paid in over time. I know this comes as a shock to some people, but when I was Commissioner of Social Security, I received many phone calls from people.
As the commissioner?
Yes, when a parent would die. Yes, I had my name listed in the book. I believe as a public official that's a responsibility. But when parents would die saying, when are we going to get the big check? And I would say, what do you mean the big check? And they'd say, well, my father only received Social Security for a month before he died, and he paid into it his whole year. And I would have to explain, no, that's not the way it works. And that speaks to the whole issue that's fundamentally important and really should be at the heart of any discussion, and is almost never discussed when we hear discussions on Social Security. It is a social insurance program. Everyone focuses simply on retirement benefits. Very important to consider the fact that it is not only a retirement insurance program, it is a life insurance program of sorts because your survivors can receive benefits. It is a disability insurance program in the event that you should become disabled. If you were purchasing private insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, and for a retirement benefits paying towards an annuity or something into the future, I can assure you you'd pay a lot more than the Social Security system. So very important to keep that in mind, and that we not simply focus exclusively on the retirement aspect of the program.
With both Joanne Barnhardt and Senator Coons on our panel, I know you have questions, so if you're watching us online, please email us your questions. And for those of you here in the room, please write your questions down. Someone will be picking them up and bringing them to me. We will be posing these questions again to the members of this panel, including Joanne Barnhardt, former Commissioner of the U.S. Social Security Administration and United States Senator for Delaware, Chris Coons. So as I look through these, one of the first ones is, are there any plans to spin off the disability portion of Social Security in order to make it separate from the retirement for the elderly? Is that a potential proposal?
Not that I'm aware of. Obviously, the super committee is considering all sorts of proposals that the general public and the rest of Congress are not privy to right now. But I'm not aware of there being any serious proposal
But do you
to
feel
spin
that
off disability.
Social Security may have to be fixed at the expense of something else? I mean, will a remedy to come up for making sure that 2046 comes and goes and there is no need for alteration of benefits? Will something else have to suffer?
Well, as we've both spoken to, 2036 is when the trust fund is depleted, the roughly $2.6 trillion that's been built up. And the program, as currently structured, will continue to pay out benefits more than 3/4 of the current benefit level, regardless, if nothing is changed. I don't think this is a trade-off. As Joanne's just said, it's not contributing to our current record-high deficits, which are a real problem that has to be tackled. Social Security is a critical covenant. It is a social insurance program that deserves attention and good stewardship, and will need some changes to make it solvent for the next 75 years. But there is no impending crisis, and we do not have to fix it at the expense of other programs or make it go down or go away in order to save other programs. It is a separate program.
It is a separate program funded by its own dedicated tax, and going back, again, back to what Dr. Seidman said in the previous panel, the fact of the matter is, he spoke to this notion of there really needed to be a bipartisan discussion of the issues. And so rather than, I think, then approaching it from the standpoint of what else has to give for Social Security to be fixed, it's more what has to give within the context of Social Security. And if you look at the past efforts to make the program sound, and I was actually working in Washington in 1983 and worked on 2 different versions of the Social Security acts and redos in the past. Gosh, I'm dating myself, aren't I? But anyway, the fact of the matter is we accomplished those reforms by doing what I called, and I don't say this to denigrate in any way, but tinkering at the margins, which meant doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, raise the taxes a little, extend the retirement age a little. It's a combination of things. So rather than doing it, I think I would prefer to discuss it in the context of what within Social Security has to give among those elements, as opposed to what has to give for Social Security.
So what do you think? You think it'll basically be the retirement age, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think what's been successful
Right.
in the past is that generally it was a little bit of everything. I think people are taking a harder look this time because there's a lot more talk about making it sustainable into the future, long-term solvency. Right now, and historically, the program has looked at a 75-year actuarial window, which means you're looking from today out 75 years, will the program be stable? And people are saying now, gee, really what we ought to do is try to make it stable on an ongoing basis so that every 75 years we don't have to come back and make the same tough choices all over again. And in fact, that's one of the things I would urge our audience as you read some of these proposals and you hear people talking about something that will absolutely fix the program. If they tell you that, be sure you look and see if it's going to be fixed so many years into the future, because a lot of things that are being talked about would actually make a difference for the next 70 or 75 years, but at that point, we'll be exactly in the same situation we are today. And so I think that's a fundamental issue for us.
We have an email question. What suggestions would you prioritize to improve Social Security? Is there a way to make it better?
Well, it's interesting. There are a lot of, at the same time that there's a lot of concern about will the program be there, the scheduled benefits be able to be met at 100% in the future. There are also concerns about, are there modifications that should be made to the program? I teach a class at Harvard on designing Social Security systems, and so actually try to keep up to date with all the things that are going on in terms of not only solvency but also enhancements. And one of the issues that, quite frankly, that comes to the fore quite a bit is this whole issue of women in the workforce, and are they being treated equitably? Because oftentimes, women are out of the workforce for various periods of time, because obviously they're the ones that have the children. Typically, they're the ones that stay home with the children, although that is changing, you know, but in the earlier years, and they are clearly, by vast majorities, the ones that take care of aging parents and sick relatives, that kind of thing. And so there's some different things that are being talked about. You know, should we do something to allow some sort of credit for them so that when their actual Social Security benefit is ultimately decided, they're not penalized for, you know, having the absence from the workforce for those numbers of years. So there are some improvements. The National Academy of Social Insurance, actually, if you're interested in seeing what some of those modifications might be, the enhancements in addition to the solvency issues, you know, are available on their website. I would just say this, that my personal view is, although some of the enhancements make an awful lot of sense from a philosophical and societal and you know, national concern point of view, until we get the finances in hand, I think it's premature to start looking at things that could make it, as you say, better for the future.
There was a serious effort as part of the Affordable Care Act to pass something called the Class Act that would provide for long-term care. By 2020, there's going to be more than 15 million Americans who need long-term advanced nursing or advanced health care. And that is a significant unmet need in our society. Just too few people have the private insurance that pays for that, and that's really sort of a gap in the current constellation of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, is the provision of affordable insurance. That's run into some real trouble. The administration was not able to implement the Class Act in an actuarially sound way. So if there's a hole, your question to us was, is there any way you could improve on it? If there's a piece that's sort of missing, it's long-term care. But I'll agree with Joanne that, you know, frankly, we need to reassure all Americans that Social Security is sound, and we're going to make the decisions to make it solvent for the long term. One of the striking things to me is the number of younger Americans who are not counting on Social Security at all. If this most important social insurance program, if this compact is going to be strong for the long term, we need younger Americans, those who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, to be confident that what they're paying in will also produce a reliable benefit for them and their children in the future. As Joanne was accurately saying earlier, you know, I'm paying Social Security now, I'm paying, you know, for my mother or our grandparents, or, you know, we don't have our own individual accounts. This is our nation's insurance. It is how we provide a floor for those who are survivors, those who are disabled, and those who are retired. So I think making our first priority securing it makes sense ahead of reaching for advancement.
But as Alice Hoffman said at the beginning of this day, I believe it was Alice, she said that it is offensive to any person who's receiving Social Security that they are trying to protect their own benefits. They are equally concerned for their children, their grandchildren, their extended family. So how can we inoculate the public? I think you've said it several times. Each panel has addressed there's no need for panic. It's not a Chicken Little moment. Yet I can see it coming as we get into the political debates on our doorstep. So how can we inoculate our voting population, our citizens, to remember what you are saying, that there is a Social Security check waiting in the future for the next generation because it's being paid into now? How will we remember that amidst all the debate, discussion, and rhetoric?
Well, that's partly why I chose to come today and put this on my calendar, was to participate in what I think is this admirable and important effort to broadcast a message about the soundness, the solvency of Social Security, not just today, but far into the future for America. As I visit people in their workplace, as I go to schools and senior centers and hospitals and workplaces in Delaware, I often ask this question: how many of you believe that Social Security will be there for you? And often folks in their 20s, 30s, and 40s they don't expect it at all. So I engage them in a conversation about it. You know, what, if any, changes would you expect to be made? Most folks are unaware that only the first $106,000 in income is subject to payroll taxes to support Social Security, and they don't realize that income above that, there's a cap. And so in many conversations I've had, folks would be open to having the cap raised, for example, as one way to increase revenue. I've had some other debates and discussions. Also, pretty much everyone is enthusiastic about reducing any fraud or waste or abuse in the system. The other choices, the other options that are available are less widely supported, but I think the first conversation is making sure that younger Americans realize they're in this too, they're paying into it, and they will benefit from it.
Yeah, I think there's no substitute for facts, quite frankly, which is why I too was glad to drive up from Virginia today to be part of this panel, because I think it's critically important that people have the correct information to understand, so it makes this forum very important. I do want to say one thing, though, and there's been a lot of emphasis today on the fact that Social Security is not going bankrupt. It's not an imminent crisis. It's not happening tomorrow. And in America, all too often, we operate on a crisis mentality. In other words, if it's not happening tomorrow, if the government isn't going to shut down in 48 hours, we don't get the budget deal. And I gesture to the senator, but with no suggestion that he's personally responsible for that. Let me be clear about that. But I do want to say that as the person who ran this agency that pays out $735 billion a year to over 55 million people, people who are retired, disabled, and surviving children and spouses of former workers, and takes the money from 160 million, or at that time it was 160 million. It's less today due to unemployment. That many workers. I believe it's critically important that we not make our litmus test as we continue this debate and move into the future simply, is America's most important social program is not going bankrupt. That's not the measure we should be using. And so I would hope that that kind of discussion and the repeated use of that phrase today is not going to have people leave here thinking, gee, we can all sit back and not worry, because again, look at that lost opportunity. It's the reverse of the power of compounded interest. Every day we don't take action, we miss the opportunity to be putting money away, to storing it in the trust fund to make more interest, to be redeemed at a future date, to build up greater reserves for the program when we do need them, and when the baby boomer generation, which is my generation, hits full retirement. We're just starting now. We're also entering our disability-prone years. But again, I say the litmus test for America's most important social program cannot be, in my view, simply that we're not going bankrupt.
And Nancy, I think another important piece of the message is frankly when there are folks who argue that it's either unconstitutional or it's a Ponzi scheme or whatever, is to sort of sift through that and say, this is a program that has enjoyed very strong support from Republicans and Democrats across many administrations from all different backgrounds across the country. I haven't seen or heard anyone in my year in the Senate take seriously and advance the argument that this is a program that ought to be unwound because it's unconstitutional, or that it is a dangerous and unsound Ponzi scheme. Folks raise alarms about long-term demographic and financial changes that we need to make some modest adjustments to this program to ensure that it's robust and solvent for the next generation as well as the current. But that's a far cry from any suggestion that it's on the verge of losing strong bipartisan support.
As we wind down, though, as an elected official, I have to ask you, because with all respect to the people gathered in the room here, and myself being over 50 as well, you're one of the youngest people, except for our interns from Delaware First Media in the room. This is one of those issues that people just don't seem, if the generation coming up does not believe they're ever going to get their benefits, right, they will not have a societal will behind change, behind what needs to happen for the future. So how can you're talking to the choir here, right, so how can we convince the rest, right, of those who have the opportunity to go into a voting booth and cast a vote to be behind productive measures for the future of Social Security?
Let me go back to the point you just referenced that was made, I think it was by Alice Hoffman on the very first panel. I believe part of why this audience, part of why a generation that is at a stage in their lives where they are benefiting from Social Security directly or from employer-provided pensions or from Roth IRAs or other personal savings vehicles, I think part of why they're so passionate about it is they understand its importance to them and for their children and grandchildren. I sit down every employee, every intern, every young person who I get to work with, whether it was at the county, at Gore, or now in the Senate, and give them my brief lecture on the power of compounding interest. Because I still remember the first time I really understood how important it was to begin saving for retirement early. I was 30. I hadn't started early enough. And I think most folks who are themselves relying on Social Security for a big part of their income in retirement finally appreciate just how powerful and important it is. My hope is that they will urge their children and grandchildren to be engaged, to fight for the survivability, the strength, the solvency of this program for the long term, it is hard to get folks in their teens and 20s and 30s worried about their retirement, because to them it seems like it'll happen in another century and to another person. But to Joanne's point earlier, and I agree with this is America's most important social program, not just because of the demographics of who is benefiting from it today, but because this is one of the most important things I can do for my 3 children. It's one of the most important legacies I could possibly leave. Before we came in, Joanne and I were sharing that I was an intern for Senator Roth the summer that she finished her service with him as an LA and went on to the Social Security Administration. The office where I interned for him is right down the hall from my current office. Senator Roth's signature accomplishment was a new vehicle for savings for Americans. If there's anything we can do together, it's to continue to urge younger Americans to fight for the long term, not just for themselves, but for our country, to be the kind of decent country that has this great program for the disabled, for survivors, and for retirees.
Senator Coons, Joanne Barnhardt, thank you so much for being here on this panel and for all of you for your questions throughout this afternoon. I'm with DFM News. I'm Nancy Karabjanian, and I'm tossing it back to Tom Byrne.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Nancy Karabjanian, for guiding us through today's discussions. I want to thank Senator Coons again, Ms. Barnhardt, and the other outstanding panelists who joined us today for this discussion. With your help, we've all become a little bit more knowledgeable regarding this important issue. And before we close, just want to suggest one more time that you check out dfmnews.org, where you can find not only the archived video from this panel discussion, but also other in-depth coverage of Social Security that we did in preparation for this panel. We'd also like to hear from you if you have any comments, questions, or feedback about this forum. We'd like to hear them at forum@delawarefirst.org. And if you want to receive emails about future events like this one and news coverage from DFM News, you can sign up at the website or ask one of us from DFM News here in the audience. Again, thank you to all of you here in Arsht Hall for joining and for your participation, as well as to our webcast viewers around the state, and also to the listeners on 90.7 FM WSDL in Ocean City. Again, thank you very much. For Delaware First Media, I thank you for joining us. My name is Tom Byrne. Have a great weekend, everyone.